This is John Gilroy from the Federal Tech Podcast.
This is Dr. Jennifer Sample from Accenture Federal Services.
Today, we're going to talk about generative AI for the U.S. federal government. Hit the music, Manny.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, where industry leaders share insights on innovation with a focus on reducing cost and improving security for federal technology. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast. My name is John Gilroy, and I'll be your moderator. We stole these headlines right from the front page of the Washington Post. Artificial intelligence. Not exactly a new headline, but it's a headline. And I think the question we're going to answer today is, from the perspective of a federal technology person, what's in it for me? Should I use it? Should I wait? Am I behind the game? Am I on top of the game? And who in the world can help me? Well, I think I know who can toss you a lifesaver is Dr. Jennifer Sample. She's got a fantastic, if you want to see a fantastic background, go to her LinkedIn profile and count patents. I ran out of fingers counting the patents and then count the degrees. And all of a sudden you go, wow, maybe she can help us a little bit. She's done it for a long time. I went to her LinkedIn profile. She was doing artificial intelligence before artificial intelligence was cool back in 2016. So I guess you got a lot of foresight in this area, huh, Jennifer?
Thank you so much, John. It's a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate the compliments. It's always been a passion of mine to realize the potential of that next big thing. So it's true. I've been tracking this for a while, and I'll just highlight something called Amara's Law, which says that in the short run, we overestimate the power of new technology, and in the long run, we underestimate the power of new technology. And I've lived that in my career, starting out in the field of nanotechnology, where, it's going to change the world, whole new periodic table of elements. I had so many people ask me, when are we going to see that impact? And here we are now with mRNA vaccines, all of us, stabilized by lipid nanoparticles, right? And so it took 20 years, but revolutionary impact. And so, that's the motivation behind the interest in generative AI.
So I get this, it boils down to a lot of things of whether it's trendy, is it something to avoid? And let's say you're on the metro and you're talking to someone and they're just really, really quickly differentiate between maybe machine learning and then artificial intelligence. And then we'll go on to some of the applications for the federal government.
Sure. The definition that I really like of artificial intelligence is machines doing things that are typically reserved for humans. And if you think about that, if you double click on that definition, the things that machines can do improves, right? So it used to be language, was a human capability. Now generative AI can translate into so many different languages, and so that bar keeps moving, but that's artificial intelligence. The machine learning is a tool in the toolkit there. I
think I forgot your title in the beginning of the podcast. Dr. Jennifer Sample, Managing Director, Accenture Federal Services. Well, Dr. Sample, if you walked into your local 7-Eleven, I'm sure they'd be talking about ChatGPT because that's everyone's talking about. My car mechanic,
exactly.
The guy who does the tree in the backyard is talking about it. And so what we're going to talk about today is maybe switch to Fed GPT. So what is this and what does it mean for my listeners?
Right. So, you can think about the potential of ChatGPT and you can play around with it. I don't know if have you played around with it?
Just a little.
You can have a lot of fun with it. You can get it to pose interview questions in your style. It can train up on examples from you. You can go crazy with the applications, right? And just because that potential exists doesn't mean that everyone's going to rush right out and adopt it. There's all sorts of questions and concerns to think through with respect to achieving mission outcomes from it, right? Federal agencies, at the end of the day, they're trying to solve a specific problem. They're trying to deliver a specific service. And so the question really becomes, how can this power up that mission? And that's what we're trying to, provide support on, from, thinking through those use cases to developing those prototypes, all the way through to scaling it up and looking for those, issues with respect to ethics, trust, bias, the whole life cycle.
So how do you think generative AI will impact the federal government?
Great question. So I think of generative AI as an amazing accelerator for many, many applications and use cases. So you can think about just generating content. Let's just stick with the name generative. right? So let's imagine you're a federal agency that gets a lot of emails, maybe complaint emails. Imagine that. There's people responding to those now. What if those people could instead focus on the problems that the emails are about, because you're able to generate responses to those emails? So that's an example, just one example. You can think of many others. Fraud. You can think of generating training content for any kind of sensor that's looking for, I think you brought this up actually, the synthetic data. Anytime you're trying to figure out yes or no and make that discrimination, you can generate additional training data around that. All sorts of use cases.
When it comes to use cases, I don't want to Google and just type in use cases. That use case for a dog catcher in Chicago or a dentist in Seattle. I don't know. However, the reason that I'm even having you on the podcast is because of a launch of the Federal Generative AI Center of Excellence. So finally, a Govy, okay, I don't have to worry about dog catchers. I don't talk about, applications of the federal government, because there's certain strictures that people have, like security and limitations. And so I would think that this would be a good place to go to maybe see use cases. And you don't have to maybe interact with anyone, but you can see the use case and see if it may or may not apply to your agency.
That's exactly right. So there's cases where you wouldn't want to feed ChatGPT your data. Obviously. You could think of many, many use cases like that. Anything involving personal information, for example, health, there's all sorts of federal health agencies and federal health applications. You want to be able to, predict who needs to be admitted to the hospital. There's so many things that you want to be able to do better, but yet you can't just put that information into ChatGPT. So again, figuring out, organizational readiness. Is this something that we should adopt, and why? What needs to be done to actually achieve that mission outcome from, a security perspective, from a technology perspective, and then rolling out and actually making that impact. That's what the Center of Excellence is all about.
I was thinking about this morning as I was prepping for this interview, and I was thinking about different situations I've been in my life, and this phrase popped: managing expectations. What do you manage expectations? So I think what you have to do is you have to realize that, it's a bright, a very shiny thing, and let's all chase after it and talk about it with our neighbors. But I think maybe your center may say, okay, just calm down, sit down, have a cup of coffee. Okay, now this is what's going to happen. and I think people wanted to do everything, but it's just like all those people who jumped into ChatGPT and gave them their accounting information. Where did that go? You don't know. If you can go to your center and say, oh, this is a case study of what happened, so don't do that, don't do this. It seems like it's a look before you leap, isn't it?
It is. And you're exactly right. So people come in thinking it's magic. Whatever the problem is, it's going to solve it. And, it's not. It's a technology like any other technology. You have to figure out how to use it. And sometimes maybe what you need isn't ChatGPT. It's a database, right? How does it work? It trains up on data. Yeah. So maybe what you need is help becoming a data-driven organization. Of course, ChatGPT can enable you to interact with your data in a conversational way, which I think is really compelling, right? Rather than having to look something up, find the Excel spreadsheet, you could just ask that question and boom, there's the answer. I think that's that's kind of to me, the tantalizing use case of just empowering everyone to do more faster, because it's just easier to interface with technology.
Okay, here's the smorgasbord. I'm at the site, generative AI use for federal agencies. First one is federal intelligence synthesis, bang. Coding and vulnerability research, cybersecurity, bang. Conversational services and customer communications, citizen communication. We just saw an executive order on that, improve customer service. Knowledge management, enterprise data transformation, synthetic data, content generation, and design inspiration. These are just, this is 5-second view of all these different agencies. It's just amazing that it starts off with so many cases like this.
Apologies. I feel like you're becoming a convert.
I'm very aware. I've seen a lot of things, and I saw natural language processing 1982. I thought, wait a minute.
Well, let's think about that. Let's think about how that works, right? 1982, it's true. And artificial intelligence and all these things have been around for a really long time, but we didn't have the computing power then that we have now. And storage was so much more expensive than it is now, right? And so it's not just AI is advancing. It's that the enabling, empowering technologies are advancing at the same time. And so that's what's really kind of, helped things to progress. Natural language processing used to be about almost like hard coding rules, like, this word appears next to this word, and that's, can predict a sequence of words. And now we're just training up on, all the world's knowledge, right?
Yeah,
Instead of doing like a rules-based, prediction-based type thing, it's deep learning enabled. And that's what's really different.
Well, Dr. Sample, I promise you a quote from Francis Bacon, because he's the science guy. He started science, didn't he? I mean, the quote he have here is that most important advances are the least predictable. So I don't know what's going to happen. You put red and blue together, you get purple. Who predicted that? I mean, you just don't know. I mean, there could be situations where a federal agency decides to jump into one aspect of artificial intelligence and not realize that it could have an impact on. My kids are teenagers, are called unintended consequences, mostly with cars. So there can be unintended consequences. And so I think I'd be very wary, and I'd go to your site and let's take a look at creating synthetic data. Who screwed up? Okay. What's Dr. Sample have to say? Oh, she's only got 10 patents. Well, I think I'm going to believe her. So it's really, that's why I'm wary, because, I think people just jump in and go, oh, I didn't expect blah, blah, blah. I mean, we picked up the iPhone a few years back. Right now I have iPhone call. I call my daughter in Africa on the iPhone in the car. I couldn't have dreamt of that, but that's Francis Bacon, isn't it? Unpredicted. Yes. So let's talk more about artificial intelligence in the federal government. So if you're going to pick out 2 or 3 use cases that you think were good applications, what would they be?
Yeah, you're bringing up some really important issues. And, and I just very quickly on that last question, I would just encourage everyone to check out the AI Bill of Rights.
I didn't know that.
I don't know if you've seen that. Yeah. I mean, and you are absolutely right. The history is littered with examples of things going off the rails a little bit because of unintended consequences. Speaking of training data, for example, training up on, who needs to be admitted to the hospital, an example that I gave already. People with pneumonia, they don't all need to be admitted. Some can go home and get better. And so if you look at, well, what were the outcomes, you find an early study found that people with asthma, did better. The outcomes were better. So did they need to be admitted to the hospital? A really basic recommendation would be no. But then when you scratch the surface a little deeper, it turns out you're training up on the wrong thing, because it's so dangerous to have asthma and pneumonia. They're always admitted. So of course the outcomes are always better. So, I think recommendation number 1 is absolutely talk to a data scientist. I'm a huge fan of the, empowering everyone, the citizen data scientist. There's a lot of tools that have come out, recently to empower people, low code, no code, and all of that. But still, there's a science to it, to how we pose the questions, to how we look at the answers. That's really important to make sure that we don't have unintended consequences, whether they be health consequences, whether they be, biased, ethical issues and that sort of thing. So I think good, low hanging fruit use cases maybe would be the no brainers, the easy ones that kind of sidestep that. I think we're seeing them already, maybe not generative, but, you're probably aware that a lot of like radiology, there's a lot of kind of AI in that, ability to recognize things even maybe better than the human. I think a very low hanging fruit would just be summarizing. So you're talking about, right now you're looking online, you're learning things, right? I mean, how powerful would it be to just get a synopsis and not have to dig around for it all yourself? So, you could think about the commercial application of something like, plan me a travel agenda, considering the fact that I'm a vegan and, give it all of the, that would be hard to figure all of that out yourself. But generative AI can kind of train up on a lot of things and answer questions like that really quickly. So I would say content summarization. And I would say content creation with kind of like less of a chance for bias, like, emails, I think is a great one.
Because I don't have a PhD, I'm a mere mortal. I use Google. This morning I typed in federal artificial intelligence. That's really sophisticated research. And I stumbled on an article by one of your colleagues. I think his name is Michael Thiem. Is that how you pronounce his name? Thiem.
Mm-hmm.
Well. Yeah. You got a rival there, because he's into the game here. He talks about 5 focus areas for artificial intelligence, or what's called generative artificial intelligence. So I think if you're listening to this podcast, you're scratching your head and you're going, well, give me a for instance. This should be a good starting point, wouldn't it? He talks bang, bang. He starts off with data. he says, look, it'll make data more accessible. And I thought, well, what's happening now in cybersecurity, the first step is find out what's on your network. And there's nodes that are dark. It's called dark data. And so maybe this can find the dark data. Maybe this can close some gaps, maybe some opportunities for attack. So that right off the bat, making data more accessible. It's practical, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes.
Good. They talk about human-centered transformation, and this word comes up whenever you deal with humans. This is kind of a tricky word. The word is trust. And earlier, I think in the podcast, I said, I'm test, but not trust. And so I think this is what I'm at, and maybe you're not, but there may be people listening who are at, is just that, okay, at what point do I trust this? And what point do I pick up the phone, talk to Jennifer Sample and say, okay, I'm about ready to trust it. So trust plays prominently in your website when talking about it, doesn't it?
Absolutely does. It's absolutely critical. And I think it's important to partner with experienced practitioners who think through issues like this. It's super important. You do need a human in the loop. How much human in the loop do you need? It depends on what you're trying to solve. And I would encourage everyone to play around with it. I've been reading this great book right now by Reid Hoffman that he co-wrote with GPT-4, which is kind of like, one step beyond. I don't know if you've heard of this book. It's called Impromptu. It's really fun, right? I mean, he's so creative in the things that he asks it. He likes light bulb jokes. And so he asked it to tell him a light bulb joke. And, he's looking for, not just, can it summarize, right? Yeah. I mean, it can summarize, but can it be funny? Does its creativity, its ability to create content rival, those things that were traditionally reserved for humans, like humor, right? And so he gets a light bulb joke and it's kind of mediocre. And then he asks, give me a light bulb joke in the style of Jerry Seinfeld. And it'll blow you away, right? Wow. So even just with that, like I would encourage everyone, play around with it, because then you just get a personal sense of what are its strengths, what are its limitations. It can definitely give you answers faster, and you really need to pay attention to the truth of those answers. And this is a well-known concern, like references, for example. You might want a specific scientific reference, and it's trained up on a lot of them. It can give you a real journal name, a real author name, page numbers and everything. But is that real? No, it's not, right? And so there's things like this, you're absolutely right, that you need to pay attention to. And when you talk about kind of federalizing it, that's what we're doing.
Yeah. So Reid Hoffman does not work for Treasury or Department of Interior. Is he the founder of LinkedIn? Is that the Reid Hoffman I'm thinking of? Yes.
Sorry. Oh, you're looking while I'm talking. Yeah.
Oh, he works in energy. Oh, yeah, he's the CIO at Energy. So you should realize that this is mostly for social media. By the way, LinkedIn is owned by Microsoft. OpenAI is open by Microsoft too. So we got to put this in perspective here. You got to have a little play card here.
You're right.
So I'm training for a race on August 3rd. And I start my training on May 1st, so just coming up here. And so sometimes there's different seasons where I start to training, and then Boston Marathon probably takes 6 months to train for. So what should federal leaders be doing now with regards to generative AI? Should they just be looking? Where should they be at?
They should start by thinking about organizational readiness to adopt this technology, right? Are there cultural issues? Some agencies are leaning all the way forward. They are chomping at the bit to use this. Think about like agencies that kind of serve the financial sector where this is already being used. They're trying to regulate, and they're not, they don't have the advantage of the same technology, that they're trying to regulate. And so I think that's an important thing to think about.
Well, I got to talk about a trending topic here. It's called deepfakes. And because I'm an audio guy, I've been doing radio for years and years. I have a friend who tested out an algorithm on AI, and it played back his voice in a believable manner. It was very scary. It could have been my wife calling saying, "Drive to St. Louis tonight." I would have believed it. I mean, this is another part of being wary of these deep fakes. And it's not just audio, it's video deep fakes too. So you got to be more and more careful, and especially this election coming up. I mean, what could possibly go wrong, as Jerry Feinstein would say?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I was reading, someone said that all of these issues with respect to misinformation are now, times 1,000. because
wow.
it just makes it, just speeds it all up. You raise a great point. This is one of those things that, I was working with, and DARPA's been working on this for years, right? We've got way more software that can create fake stuff than software that can detect fake stuff. So it's a very, you are bringing up all the issues and it's a really important issue, and we need to be able to detect it and be prepared to handle it.
Here's the issue I have.
Yeah.
I'm going down to the classroom tonight at 5:20. I've got half a dozen graduate students there. They have a blog post that's due, 500-word blog post. Now, did they use AI? What do they use? Next door neighbor, someone, their guy next door write it. And so because it's a small face-to-face, I can say, okay, Jennifer, tell me about this book you wrote. Okay, tell me about Reid Hoffman. Oh, really? What happened in chapter 2? Why'd you read that book? And so in a small environment like that, I can go face-to-face, and I know if they read the book or not. And by the way, it's pretty obvious, and everyone else knows too. But it's not always obvious in other situations. So I know there's sites out there that can determine whether or not it's created by artificial intelligence. I think even Google may deprecate an article written by John Gilroy with artificial intelligence. So, I mean, some of these things are just you talked about making false references. Well, that's one thing. And I'm sure my student come up with a 1,000-word blog with 50 references, then go face to face and they go, well, I don't know. But it's almost like maybe it's encouraging the face to face. Huh? I don't know. Maybe it's swing back.
Yeah. Or do we want them to use it, right? To unharness completely new areas of creativity enabled by the time savings of doing some of the summarization in an automated way. I mean, this is what we need to think through, not just as a government, really, but as a society, right? You can imagine different universities, some embracing it, some blocking it.
Let me give you on one hand and the other hand. On the one hand, your good friend Elon Musk says, oh, we got to stop developing artificial intelligence because we don't know where it's going. On the other hand, he launches an AI company. And so, I mean, it's like, the information you have here, I would go to the Accenture Federal Services site and I'd read every blog post on there. Yeah. I'd read your stuff. I'd read, Michael's stuff. And it's just because it's in a no man's, what's in World War I? They had the no man's zone in there or something. That's where we're at. There's bullets come from both sides, launching artificial intelligence, artificial detector, back and then it's got to be confusing in the federal government because you're not dealing with selling donuts. You're not dealing with selling tires. You're dealing with personal health information. You're dealing with the military. So, I mean, you can put people in harm's way if you get deceived by a fake, can't you?
You absolutely can. And that's the whole point of this Center of Excellence, right? I mean, to me, the issues that you're outlining, complexity, right? Uncertainty, that's what leadership is about. And so that's what we want to do. We want to pioneer the thought leadership around how to use this, the adoption of the technology, the development of the use cases, the prioritization based on these sorts of issues that you're talking about, all the way down to what technology, how do we build the technology to, you're not going to catch everything, but to stack the odds in your favor. And then how do we check it on the other end? You're absolutely right. We need to think through all of these things, and we're just beginning. You see all sorts of like AI and Training Act, like the government has stepped up with different, I talked about the Bill of Rights, like there's a lot there. Generative AI, we're not there yet, right? So we need to all think through this collectively.
I mentioned your LinkedIn profile, and when I grow up, I want to have a profile like this. So it's amazing, physical chemistry, patents, space stuff. I mean, all kinds of stuff. It doesn't sound like you're a policy wonk. However, maybe you have to take that brain of yours and dip it into the little tub of policy, because maybe we have to come up with some kind of a policy. How do you set this generative AI policy? And is it going to have to change? And maybe that's the guiding force. I think a lot of people are saying, well, try it out. But especially with the federal government, especially with all the security requirements they have and storage. I mean, the storage alone, there's a policy statement just on storage, isn't there?
Yes. The point that you raise is really important in the context of the global strategic power competition, right? You want to be responsible in how you use it. You want to have guardrails. You want to have policy. Also, you want to keep in mind that, other competitors have different laws. They have different ways of integrating commercial and military technology, and so there's that context that's really important too. If we're not, we could be using it, we could not be using it. That doesn't mean it's not going to be used elsewhere.
Right. If you put your head in the sand, then your opponent comes up with something that is creative, innovative, and it sounds like John Gilroy, and you go, whoa, I didn't realize that.
And that's the balance, right? We have to find that balance.
Well, final question here, as they say on the TV. Final question, final word from you. So let's say you're a Govy and you see the advantages of some of this. Go to your website and learn more. What's a couple of baby steps? Should they start playing with it at home on a machine separate from their federal machine? I mean, start playing with ChatGPT and these image generators as well. So what's the baby steps here?
I mean, your kids probably already have an account. I definitely encourage people to play around with it, to just see firsthand, the strengths, the weaknesses, the limitations, the opportunities. So definitely do that. And, start talking to people about it. I think it's important. We're hosting a series of invitation-only federal roundtables. And I think it's just really important to talk to others about it. Like we've said, there's a lot that we need to figure out, collectively. Should we lean in? Should we lean out? What happened? Something that happened somewhere is a good lesson learned for someone else, right? And so I think it's really important not to just, completely avoid it, but instead to play around with it in a safe way and start that conversation, because as a team, we'll figure out the path forward and how to strike that balance.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you do have the Center of Excellence where someone can just be a lurker. They don't have to be a high-level executive because they're going to be 10 years from now, the high-level executives, and just find out what's going on and see what other people, see what mistakes have been made. Because, write this down, there's going to be gaffes. I mean, someone's going to do the wrong thing. And, some company's going to send out, let's say, an email that is not worded properly because AI doesn't care. Generative AI doesn't care. It could be worded improperly, and then bad things happen. So I don't want to.
Yeah.
Anyway,
and there's examples. I mean, you can find them online of previous chatbots and all of that. And so there have been some steps taken, with ChatGPT in particular, to avoid those sorts of outcomes. And you don't hear about them as much. We learn, things get better over time. But you're right. You're right. Yeah.
So if you want to pursue this, generative AI for U.S. federal agencies, Accenture, all kinds of articles there. You can find out what use cases work, what don't work, and just go home and play around with it, and then jump in the water, or start asking questions, because it can save you time, can save you money, and you almost you owe it to the citizens, and you owe it to the executive order that's telling you use AI to improve citizen services, and maybe you can get your answers quicker from the IRS or FEMA or any of these agencies, medical agencies as well. Great. Thank you very much. You've been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Jennifer Semple, Managing Director, Accenture Federal Services.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for listening to the Federal Tech Podcast. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.